respected Tay, dear respected elders, dear brothers and sisters, dear community, good morning. Today is October 12th, 2017. We're in the Great Meditation Hall at Magnolia Grove Monastery on the third day of the Magnolia Grove's U.S. Tour Retreat entitled Peace in Oneself, Peace in the World. Can everyone hear okay? Okay. I hope everyone has had a chance to settle in and become acclimated to the changing climate. It's usually nice to be at a monastery for at least 3 or 4 days because it takes time for the body and the mind to really shift gears from the speed and the pace outside. And sometimes if we don't allow our body and mind to settle, we continue to run even in the monastery. So I hope you've taken a conscientious steps to slow down and really enjoy the slower pace here, the nothing to do-ness here. The brothers and sisters are taking care of everything so that we can have this space to really stop and look more deeply. Yesterday we were very fortunate to bathe in a very beautiful bath of Dharma by Sister Janduk. And in her talk, we learned about pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, and mixed feelings. I'm very aware right now that in this big hall there is not a single mosquito biting me right now. And that neutral feeling is actually a very pleasant feeling. We can touch the practices of mindfulness in very concrete ways, in moment to moment in our daily life. If we look with the eyes of a practitioner, there's always a chance for us to explore our mind, explore the minds of others, come to a deeper understanding. So today, I'd like to go further into the practice of peace. We learned yesterday that peace comes about from awareness of our pleasant feelings, awareness of our neutral feelings, and just from that awareness grows the nourishment. Happiness can grow from just being aware. But we also know that we are not just we don't just experience pleasant and neutral feelings. We are a whole spectrum. And we also have quite unpleasant feelings sometimes. And the practice of peace, being peace within oneself, is not just to be with our pleasant and neutral feelings, but learning how to engage with, relate to, and transform those unpleasant feelings as well. So the practice of peace is the spirit of peace with which we relate to those icky mosquitoes, those pesky conversations, those irritations. And it plays out in the social sphere. We are very aware that what we do here is not just for our small, insular self, or even just for our family, but it has a great impact out on society. Our capacity to take care of those uncomfortable things that come our way gives us strength to face, confront, and help to transform, engage in those things that are much larger, much more troublesome out there in society. So peaceful confrontation is an actuality is a possibility if we put our energy of practice into it. A number of years ago it was one of our U.S. tours, and we made our inroads into our neighbors up north in Canada. I remember a particular incident that has always stayed with me. It was about peaceful confrontation. A number of us were on an afternoon. We had a kind of a lazy day when we weren't engaged in a Dharma a retreat. So we were taking a walk out on town, and it was a number of brothers and sisters together. And there was a gentleman who was starting to follow us, and he was engaging in speech that was a little bit of inquisitive, not necessarily negative, but a little bit provocative. And he started to follow, and in particular, he started to try to engage the sisters in the group. This went on for probably half a block or a block. And because the sisters weren't reacting, we were trying our best not to react to this kind of provocation, it started escalating. It was touching something in him, so he started getting a little bit pushy, a little aggressive. And one of our brothers in the group, when he realized what was happening, very, very quickly, but very kindly, the energy was confrontatory but peaceful, not angry at all. He turned to the man. He said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. We're just trying to have a peaceful walk here. I'm sure you can understand." The sisters and brothers continued to walk, and he engaged the gentleman in that conversation of who we are, what we're about, why we're wearing brown. I'm sure in his heart he had intentions, just good intentions, to know what in the world was going on with all these brown, bald-headed people. But the way that he was engaging with us, it was quite uncomfortable. And so that image of that brother taking that action very peacefully stayed with me. And for me is an example of how, if we are from a place of peace, of clarity, we can engage in action that has a positive effect, that doesn't escalate the matter, and is a way forward for both that gentleman and for us. So this is today's talk is dedicated to one of our favorite strong emotions. Out of fear, despair, and anger, I decided to focus on anger today. So we know that working on anger is not just a management. We hear that sometimes, anger management. I want to emphasize that working with, understanding our anger is peace work. Peace work is anger work. Anger work is peace work. And it's important that we engage in this mud, right? Because we as human beings, we should give ourselves permission to be fully human, fallible. We make mistakes. We dip into negative afflictions. And to acknowledge that, first of all, is a practice of loving kindness for ourselves and all of humanity. When we can begin to acknowledge that there is that seed of anger in us, then that's a start of being able to be in peace with those parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable. So how many of us here have anger issues? Okay, that's a kind of hard term, so how about this? How many of us have challenges with anger sometimes? Okay, a little bit more people. How many of us know someone who has issues with anger? Okay. So honestly, most of us should be raising our hand at that point. Because as we learn from Buddhist psychology, we all have all of these seeds, positive and negative, wholesome, meaning wholesome or unwholesome. And it's just a matter of fact, reality, to say, yes, I have anger in me. Yes, my loved ones have anger in me. And yes, sometimes I water that anger in them quite a lot. So this is a loving approach to this seed. So we acknowledge it in order to become more whole, first of all. We also need to work on our anger as a practice, because if we leave this particular seed untended, it can have quite harmful effects. We already can see that out in society, out in our relationships when we have arguments, conflicts, and they fester. We don't take care of our anger. We don't acknowledge the other person's anger. We see it in the political sphere. So we know that anger is a force to be reckoned with. And as an emotion in Buddhism, we know its rightful place in our life. Maybe it's taking up quite a lot of space in our heart and mind right now, but the teachings point to a drawer that we can actually more accurately put this emotion in. It is an emotion. Our teacher would say, it is just an emotion. It's not to negate its power, but to help us begin to have a working, loving relationship with anger. So for me, I respect anger greatly. First of all, because I can see how harmful it is in me. It wreaks havoc in my peace of mind. Sometimes when I'm bit by anger, it takes me quite a long time to come back to a place of stillness and clarity, loving kindness. And I've seen it in my relationships with others. When I touch someone's anger, you have to deal with the karma of that. So who wants that, right? So it's something that we respect because it has a power to affect very negatively the environment. But also we respect our emotions. We respect other people's emotions because it is a gateway into understanding ourselves more deeply. What is at the heart of what we value, what we hold dear, what we're afraid of? Anger is that gate that allows us to see ourselves, sometimes quite suddenly, more clearly. So today, I'd like to invite us to gather the strength to look deeply at our own anger. Make this a personal thing. This is your anger or your beloved one's anger. Actually, it's probably your anger, but if it's easier, let's just say your beloved one's anger. Make it personal. And we take strength to look into this because we are being nourished every day at this retreat with Dharma, with awareness of the positive and neutral. So we already have a foundation from which to take some strength to now shine the light in a darker corner, deeper corner. And secondly, we take courage from our aspiration to do well by the world, to do well by others. We take courage from the fact that everywhere in all different corners of this monastery, we have safe spaces in our Dharma sharing circles to engage in this acknowledgement of who we are as whole human beings, the anger, the joy, the hope, the fear. We're opening ourselves up to who we are, to be fully human. Okay, so anger is front and center. So we're going to put anger up on the pedestal to kind of like a clump of clay and look at it. I think most of us know what anger feels like, right? So there are a couple of approaches that I'd like to take. First of all, we will get into what it feels like in our mind and our body. But first of all, from a more objective space, we're going to take a step back and look at it kind of from a personal academics way. Right? Anger is what? Anger is a kind of feeling, unpleasant feeling, first of all. And anger is an intense displeasure pointed or towards against something that causes us something. Okay, there's some big question marks, so let me just write a few of these phrases down. Intense displeasure aimed towards. So it's not just sitting there, but it's coming out of you. It's radiating out, aimed at that thing or that person or that situation that we perceive is hurting us, right? Harming us, offending us. Annoying us. Okay, so it's an intense displeasure radiating out, aimed against something that is causing us some sort of blockage. The question before us, when we look deeply, is what is it blocking? We'll get back to that later. What is it challenging that causes us to kind of swarm up like a swarm, like a bee's nest? Okay, so I don't know if anyone has ever had a callus either on your foot, your hand, right? We know that in the body has a way of dealing with pain, sensitivities. For example, you get a splinter in your finger or I play guitar, so when I play, the nerves underneath are quite sensitive, and over time, a callus kind of is created above that sensitivity, or that splinter, or that corn in your foot. Underneath that hard part, there is an area of sensitivity. And I'd like to invite us to reflect on anger as this combination of hardness, of harshness, that callous, and that underlying sensitivity. What lies underneath? Again, that's the question. We can see anger as a kind of habit energy of reacting. And it's a reaction because we are trying to regain or restore something that we have lost. Sometimes anger comes from a place of fear, right? I remember a friend of mine in college, she almost overdosed. At that time, I didn't know that she was trying to block out pain. I thought that she was trying to commit suicide. And I didn't understand why. So when I heard that she had almost overdosed, what it touched in me was a strong fear and a strong anger. Strong fear followed by anger. And I confronted her with that question, how could you do that? Why? What were you thinking? And I learned after that she wasn't trying to harm or hurt herself. She was just trying to block out the pain with the pills, and that was the only way she knew how. But in that situation, both she and I touched desperation and fear, and mine turned to anger, and her turned towards trying to escape. There's a relationship between fear and anger sometimes. If any of us are parents, how many of us here are parents? Yeah, do you ever get angry at your children because they've done something that scared the beheebie-jeebies out of you? Right? That fear quickly can turn into anger. So this is a reaction that we need to look at carefully to get at the roots of. So fear is one side, one kind of push of anger, one kind of sensitivity. This sensitivity here, what is underneath is a fear. Fear is something that it's a feeling of being afraid. Something in us that was secure is no longer secure. So underneath this harshness, this prickliness of our anger is also a sense of self, or we would call it our manas. What we define as who we are, what belongs to us, I, me, mine. And when that is threatened, that can also give rise to anger, right? How dare you cut in front of me when I'm driving? This lane belongs to me, right? Road rage is a very strange phenomenon, but when you look at it in the light of a sense of self, it becomes a little bit more understandable. How dare you take that from me? That belongs to me. How dare you challenge my view? My view. So it all has something to do with our sense of self, our pride, what we feel entitled to. Never mind about whether we actually are entitled to it or not. That's not the question. As Dharma practitioners, we are focused on the facilness of our mind in relationship to what it is that is there. We talk about right action later, okay? So I'm speaking especially for our social justice group. There's another part to this, but we're not focusing on that right now. Okay. So anger can be seen as a habit energy manifesting in reaction to. It could be physical, so this can be seen as maybe our manas, the definition of who, what we are, what belongs to us, our entitlement. And it can come, our habit energies can come in different ways. A physical habit energy of anger is, for example, when you stub your toe and right away you yell at the table. That anger, which even as we see it, is so nonsensical, but it's a habit. Okay, so that's a physical manifestation of anger, a physical habit energy of anger. I mentioned emotionally, like the fear from a place of insecurity. Your child comes home late, 4 o'clock in the morning, you don't know where they've been, and that sense of fear for them turns into anger. How could you have made me feel that way, right? These words of how could you? And the anger that we touch as a habit energy, mental anger, again, it has to do with our sense of self, our sense of entitlement. I have a way of thinking about myself as an elder sister, as a younger sister, as a woman, as an equal. And if this is challenged by someone's actions or words, then it can touch off some anger because there's a blockage, it's a challenge, something that we perceive to impinge, to injure this ego of ours. It's like a cut. You think you're cool? You're not that cool, right? When we hear that, we have many different ways of reacting. It's on them, it's a self-reflection on myself. I get angry about the way the person perceives me. So there are many ways to go depending on our clarity. So let's take a moment. I'd like to invite you to turn to your neighbor and just to take a few minutes each to reflect on habit energy of anger. How does it manifest in either you or your loved one? Physically, emotionally, mentally, how does it manifest? Can you give a concrete example of something that happened recently? Be brave. This is us acknowledging our humanity. So be brave to begin looking. One more minute to wind down. Was that fun? I'm just curious, did anyone feel like they had to censor themselves a little bit? Just a little bit? It's okay. Yeah, it's kind of relieving to look at our anger in the light of the practice. Just like everything in the light of the practice becomes lighter, becomes more bearable. Okay, so knowing that anger is a force to be reckoned with is something that is inside of us, in our loved ones. We have the motivation to practice with our anger. When we look at the 5 mindfulness trainings, we see anger in various places. There's a reason for that. It's because it clouds our judgment. It doesn't allow us to act in our wisest way, to be our wisest self. So how do we practice, concretely, how do we practice with anger? Yesterday, Sister Chanduk was sharing about the relationship of body and mind And this is also our beginning and end point with anger. So anger, we see it's a kind of habit energy when we react to something in displeasure, in intense displeasure. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. Two very important things I forgot to mention. So anger, its function is to protect something, kind of restore something. What is that something? And it's cumulative. These are two qualities as we study anger that we keep in mind. Okay? Cumulative meaning it's not at level 10 automatically. It starts out with a vague, kind of like that vague itch, that vague irritation that begins to fester when we don't practice with it, or that it continues to happen and we don't take care of it. It builds, we repress it, we deny it, and then it blows up and it becomes an anger. So it's cumulative. It means it has causes and conditions that create this manifestation of this energy. And its function is to protect. Again, that's the question we go. What is it protecting? I already put the answer on the board, but just in case you didn't catch that. What is it protecting? Okay, so practicing with our anger, we come back to anger as an energy that also manifests in both body and mind. How many of us here have very concrete manifestations of anger in their body? Can you name me a few places that you can see it showing? Faces, shoulders, the heart constriction, eyes, blood pressure, wow, jaw, yeah. What else? Stomach, roiled stomach. Breath, rapid breath, no breath, heavy breath. Fists, redness. So we see that it manifests not just in concrete places in the body, like people mention the stomach, shoulders, jaw, but it manifests in the functioning of the body too, the way we breathe, the heat in the body, the dilation, the blood, etc. So it is a very intimate relationship between our mental, emotional state and our physical state. And we know that one way of taking care of this non-dualistic body-mind, if we're having anger, is to take care of the body. So our teacher likens this to taking care of the fire and not running after the arsonist. When there's a fire going on literally in your body, we bring our attention back to the body. We protect our senses. So we guard ourselves from further injury, first of all, with the breath. The breath allows us to bring ourselves to a place of safe refuge, an attention to something that can calm us down, come back to a baseline of peace. So the breath is very important just for that fact, is that it takes our attention away from that fuel that's burning, that's continuing to burn. That fuel might be the person's continued comments, their negative energy, the injustice that we see right before us. It's not to say that we don't acknowledge that, but the most important thing as practitioners that we need to do first is to take care of our anger so that we have clarity, a dispassionate, calm and clarity of mind to then deal with the situation. Just like when my brother turned, he didn't turn from a place of anger. He didn't turn with a closed fist, with a raised voice, which could have added fuel to the other gentleman's situation. He came from a place of clarity and a willingness to engage and explain, kind of a place of peace. So our breath is a refuge, breathing in, aware, again, just like we just did as together, aware that I have anger in me, aware that I'm angry, breathing out, aware that I am angry. So many times we skip that. We jump and we focus only on that arsonist, and we cling to their actions, their negative actions, their negative words, to justify what it is that we're hoping to grasp for, what we're trying to protect, what we're trying to restore. So that breath is a way of stopping, and that breath is a way of looking deeply, not out there, looking deeply at ourselves. Oh, wow. Breathing in. There's anger in me. If we cannot say anger, but we can certainly see our hands shaking. Wow, breathing in, my hand is shaking. Breathing in, I feel my face hot. Breathing out, I know I have anger in me. That's the first step. We take care of the fire in our body. We acknowledge it so that we can then begin to take care of it. Acknowledging is the first step of, we call it mere recognition. We recognize, we identify it, what is it, and where is it? I feel heat, I feel it in my body. So this is, please don't feel like we are distracting ourselves. This is not to take ourselves away from the issue at hand. This is a way of engaging more intelligently with the issues at hand. So we look deeply to see what it is, heat, where it is in my face. My heart is beating. Breathing out. If we can, if it's just a minor irritation, if it hasn't accumulated to the point where we're all prickly, we can do the work then of calming. Breathing in, aware of that slightly beating heart. Breathing out, I calm my heart. I send love to my heart. Okay. We're not thinking about the wrongs or the injustices right now. We're just taking care of the body. In the fourth mindfulness training, there's a line specifically about a commitment. When we are angry, we are determined not to speak, right? Because speech, our speech or other speech, can be quite inflammatory. Someone doesn't need to cut us off with their car, but they can cut us off with their language. They can cut us down with their language, and it can be quite a shock, quite a pain, quite a challenge to our ego, right? It can give rise to immediate feelings of anger. So, I've lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Speech. So we need to be careful with how we engage with speech, especially when we're angry. And it's such a habit, that's why in the fourth mindfulness training it spells it out clearly. I am determined not to speak when I'm angry. So another way we practice, besides coming back to our breath, is to disengage with that arsonist. We can disengage if it's gentle. We disengage with our breath. The person may be talking. We just come back to the breath, and we feel the in and out, the rise and fall of the abdomen, till we have a calmness enough to re-engage. If it's too strong, and as intelligent practitioners, we know when things are too challenging for us, it's time to step away. That means we don't engage in the conversation anymore, especially when we feel emotion tinging our voice. And we are advised to actually change the scenario, take a time out, and we have every right to do that. If we're engaged in a situation where it's too overwhelming, we have a right as intelligent practitioners to say, wait a minute, I'm sorry, this is not the best time for me to engage in this. I need to take a break. And that's so that you can take care of both yourself and the other person. Because the more you engage in that emotional situation, the more likely you're watering their negative seeds too. So we disengage. One, with the breath. Two, we change our activity or our environment. Sometimes we feel obliged to be, but again, we're looking more deeply into our practice. What is important as practitioners? To develop this capacity to be peace, to be clear-minded, to have a deeper understanding. How does it serve us if we stay in a toxic environment that doesn't allow us to heal, doesn't allow us to be nourished? So take strength in your integrity as a practitioner to give yourself permission to change your environment, to engage in another activity so that you can calm, so you can freshen up, so that you can be your better self to come back to that situation later on. Okay? So this is especially for those of us who feel a little bit obliged or feel a little stuck in situations. We don't have to take it. In fact, we shouldn't take it if it's past our capacity. In this process of taking care of the body and the mind through our breath, through our mindful walking, we are engaged in the practice of loving kindness, compassion for ourselves. That arsonist takes up a lot of mental space, and we don't want to give them free rein of our body and mind. We need to make space to take care of what's underlying our anger, what's underneath that callous. What is that sensitivity? So now we look at the relationship between our body and mind. It's easier, right, to feel that our face is flushed. But what in our emotional life is being touched? What is that sensitivity that's being touched? This is the real work. When we look at our anger, we start to look at it in terms of what are we suffering from? What sensitivities, underlying sensitivities, do we have? Maybe those sensitivities we developed, we were transmitted by our parents. They have certain suffering in their life, and from their life they've passed on to us a certain vigilance so that we won't be hurt in the same way that they did. And then from them, their parents too. They don't want their children to be hurt the same way they did, so you have to be extra strong, extra firm, extra clear and protective about certain aspects of yourself, right? So there's these sensitivities that are kind of there in the background that we normally, from a place of reaction, we normally never even touch. We just react. We just protect. We just restore that which we don't really know. And this is the place where we have a chance to begin looking when we move away from the habit energy of reacting out, bring the attention back to the body, bring the attention back to the mind. Embrace, just watching what's coming up, what feels inflamed, what feels hurt, what feels offended. Then we begin to have a chance to go more deeply than just, you're bad, you hurt me. We start to use exploratory language. What was hurt in me? What is it that I value that was injured? These are questions, when we begin to dig into it, it softens that hardness, that hard cover of our sense of self, and we have a chance to explore. Okay, so the breath and changing the environment, it gives us nourishment, because when we are with the breath, we are with the present moment. When we are with the breath that is ragged, and we can stay with that ragged breath, we are observing ourselves in the present moment, not getting caught again by the storyline of what just happened to us, how we were victimized, how things should be this way, and that whole storyline that takes us off on a curve, an arc that is very far away from that sensitivity that we've been protecting. Present moment, breath in, ragged. Present moment, breath out, calming the breath, slowing the breath, coming back to a place of peace, present moment. And that is a nourishment. Secondly, we, in the process of being with ourselves, we have the awareness that we are taking care. We are offering ourselves loving kindness and compassion. So the angry person can be loving and kind. The angry person, you as an angry person, can at once be compassionate to yourself. And again, we are taking care not just of ourselves, but when we disengage from the other person, we're taking care of that person too. Many years ago, my father and I had an argument, and I was very riled up. And you know how anger is when you are really riled up, and without a practice, you want to rile up the other person. So I was saying things to try to get him to argue in this conflict back, and he just shook his head. He just, it made me so angry at first that he just refused to engage. It's like, no, I'm not gonna argue. I'm not gonna go there. So what that really was, it kind of left me at the wall, or you could say a mirror, to look back and only see myself. He wasn't providing any hooks for me to grab onto to justify my anger. And that was a very skillful way of de-escalating the situation. And after that, even as angry as I got when he, at first, that he wasn't engaging, afterwards I was very thankful that he did that. That was his way of changing the environment, disengaging with that negative activity, that inflammatory activity, and allowing me to come back to myself. So this, as we see, taking care of anger is really a very inclusive practice. We do it for our greater self, not just for ourselves, just for oneself. And as we continue to strengthen our capacity to come back to the breath, come back to the body as it is reacting right now, we have the chance to be nourished by impermanence. We see that we are changing, that it's not an everlasting fire, an everlasting injustice, an everlasting anger, but that our body, without the negative intervention of our mind, has its own wisdom to come back to a place of calm and peace. And if our body can do that, it leads our mind also to come back to a place of calm and peace. So we see the impermanent nature of our emotion, that unpleasant feeling, very intense, ready to shoot daggers out, shoot arrows out, but we don't give into that habit energy. We change our focus to something that is safer, our refuge, our breath, to our feet. We do walking meditation, we leave the scene. We see that our body is calming. Our mind is no longer buzzing. Maybe it takes 5 minutes, maybe it takes an hour. It's okay. We don't need to judge ourselves. That seed might be very big in us, so it just takes more time for some of us to take care of the seed. But anyway, as practitioners, we're not looking at the time, we're looking at the practice, the process. The important thing is we engage in the process, calming, looking in the present moment, seeing, impermanence, it's changed. I'm not angry anymore. And when our mind comes back to that situation as it most usually does, even though we might be irritated, at least we're not at that intense angered place anymore, right? So that cyclone has been downsized. Now it's that mosquito bite again. And we can work with that. And so this is the ongoing practice of anger transformation. The Buddha's teachings on the exercises, the 16 exercises of breathing, what we're looking at more carefully is how we come into contact with strong emotions, specifically anger here, but mental formations, and how we can calm the mind as they arise. It's the 7th and 8th breathing exercise. So it's very practical. You know. When the emotion comes, we focus on this kind of breathing exercise, breathing in, aware of the feeling, unpleasant or unpleasant, breathing out, calming. And those words we flesh out with our intelligent practice. Maybe the word breathing out, calming, doesn't really affect us, but we know what ways do calm us. So that's what it means when we say calming the mental formation. If it means breathing in, aware of the unpleasant feeling anger in me, breathing out, I'm walking meditation. I'm doing walking meditation. You intelligently practice what calms that mental formation for you. Each one of us has to fill in that piece for us. What works for you? What has worked for you? So when we are out of the storm, when we have taken care of that tension to release it so that we are more or less in a baseline, we now have a chance to further reflect, looking at the causes and conditions of our anger. Here are some questions I would like to pose for us to reflect on. So when that anger did arise, what felt blocked? What felt challenged? What felt negated or neglected? What felt challenged, blocked, negated, neglected. And when we're in that place of calm, we can start to see kind of the pieces of how our anger arose. For me, a lot of times it has to do with my perceptions of the other person's intentions, right? If that person unknowingly did something, somehow it's easier to take than if you feel like they had an intention to do you some harm. Anyone else feel that way? It's so much harder. It's so much more, it's much easier to give rise to anger when we feel like they're intentionally doing that, right? So now we have also a chance to reflect on our relationship with this issue of intention. First of all, we have probably made some major assumptions about their intention in the heat of the moment. But from a place of calm, we can start to ask, what was my perception? Really, perception is different from the objective reality. What was my perception, or what was my assumption about their actions that negated me, that hurt me, that blocked me, that challenged me? And we often skip that because we don't have that habit of turning inward. It's always something's out there. So every few years, our sisters and brothers change Hamlets, and one of my sisters had moved away from the Hamlet that I was in for a number of years. And I have to say, while we were living together in the Hamlet, we didn't have a very cozy relationship. It was never out and out confrontatory, but there was some negativity there. There was a little bit of a feeling of disconnect, and sometimes some nitty stuff, you know. But when she came back, there were things. She came back to the Hamlet again. Both of us saw that our relationship had changed for the better. There was more spaciousness and empathy. And when we were reviewing that together, the funny thing was that she shared in expressing gratitudes, flower watering, and beginning a new session for our community that, oh, in the time that I've been away, it seems you've changed. And I feel, and I feel like I can understand you better. I feel closer to you now. And I was thinking, oh, that's odd, because honestly, I really feel like she was the one who changed it. When she came back, she was the one who changed it, and that's why we have a closer connection now. So putting two and two together, I guess that means we both change it for the better. There was a shift in both of us that allowed us to see one another better. But this isn't our natural tendency to say, life is like that because, and then looking inside. We tend to place it on the outside. So this is why when we look at further reflection of our anger, we conscientiously come back to what is my perception, my assumption about their intention, especially because intention can set us off. Right? And then we can go further. The person's intention can be, the person's actions can be, one, unintentional. They had no idea that what they did made us feel angry. Two, it could be intentional, but only because they have a different way, a different understanding of life. Or three, it was an intentional action with malice. Okay. So we have before us the full array of intention, from totally clueless to, yeah, different, challenging, but it's just because we disagree, we have a different view, to I'm doing this to hurt you, to harm you with that intention. And as practitioners, we look to see what our perception is and then to untie the knot. In each of those three scenarios, as practitioners, we have a way forward. If it were unintentional, then what is the path before us? It's obviously not to scream, yell, berate, and judge. It's not to blame, because it's out of lack of awareness. And who among us have not been aware of things that have caused us to be unskillful, right? So we can more easily relate, and we know the path before us is to engage in order to help the person understand what? Not their unskillfulness, but to help them understand our sensitivity. Okay, so when you came into the room and you kind of spoke in that way, and I was having a major migraine right then, you weren't aware, and I just wanted to let you know it was just because I was not well. I was feeling ill in the body and in the mind, so I reacted that way. The person may have had no idea, so we know the path before us is to help them understand our place, our sensitivity. If they had an intentional action that challenged us, then again we have a way out. Earlier, Sister Janduk was talking about views, and in the absolute dimension, no view is right view is no view. But I'm going to go back to the historical a little bit more. There are many different views in life, and our view is the one that we usually call the right view, which is wrong view. So they're serving as a bell of mindfulness for us. They're not wishing us any harm, they're just offering a different view. And it's a bell of mindfulness to remember, there are many ways up the mountain. As a Sangha, there are many ways to build Sangha. There are many ways to do any one thing. And we begin to bathe in that awareness, remind ourselves, be open to that so that we can collectively build something beautiful. Now the third situation, there's a malice that's attached with that intention. How, as practitioners, do we hold that in our heart? The baseline of liberation, according to Buddhism, is liberation through understanding. And we understand that anything that happens with ill intent comes from a place of lack of understanding, lack of awareness. Out of ignorance, people do and continue to do and say things that harm us. Out of ignorance, they push against, they try to protect, they try to push down others because their scope of awareness, their scope of understanding, their scope of love has not yet been able to encompass us as an individual, or us as a people, us as a society, us as any demographic that you want to cut. And so that's the baseline understanding that we come back to. That malice is from a place of lack of understanding. And again, if we want to build a more socially equitable society, if we understand that as our baseline, we know that the route isn't through righteous anger, righteous indignation, venting our anger, but it is the way of taking care to come back to a place of compassion, to find what we have in common, and then to work to grow that commonality, that understanding of that commonality. So this is a space that we take when we have calm. Anger is something that takes hold of us, and normally we react very quickly. But as we continue to practice to be with the breath, we'll remember to come back to the breath more quickly, more easily, and perhaps avoid some of the pitfalls that we fell into, the wrong words, the harshness that we engaged in, that maybe stopped ourselves from feeling bad at the time, but it caused harm in the long run. Maybe it restored our sense of peace or righteousness, but in the process it shut down the other person. It hurt the relationship. So this steady coming back to a meditation practice of being still, to take a look at what's going on, both the wholesome and unwholesome seeds, is what we're doing, strengthening our capacity, our resilience, as we would say. Every day we have a space to sit. Every day you have a space to sit at home. Even as busy as you are, none of us can say that we don't have 5 minutes, 10 minutes in a day interspersed here and there just to be with ourselves, right? Honestly, can anyone say they have absolutely no time to just sit and breathe? Yeah. So we want to conscientiously bring this into a place of practice, a daily practice of coming back to the breath, coming back to the body, goes a long way in helping us to take care of our anger, our strong emotions. But it's not easy. This isn't to say that anger is something that goes away right away. We need a continual practice in order to help us move in that direction. And we also need to remind ourselves not to get discouraged when anger flares up. It happens so quickly. I remember once at Blue Cliff, one of our friends didn't have enough money to take a cab. So the cab driver, the last cab driving company that we called, said that they would give her a discount so she could take the cab to go. And she was under a time constraint. When the cab driver came, he reneged on what they said. So she didn't have enough money to do it, and he knew she was in a difficult situation because she had to go. So she asked me to step in on her behalf to try to negotiate with this cab driver. And I went through the whole process of explaining how, she doesn't have enough money, she's in a time constraint, can you please, honor what you said? That was, for me, the point that I was going to get hot on. You said that you would do this. So could you please just, here you can see already I have this judgment that he should do this. Can't you just honor what you said and also be kind? So apparently I was insistent enough that he said, okay. So she got her bags in the cab and was preparing to go, and I was the one to pay because she didn't have the change. So I told him, we don't have the right change. Can you change out this for... Some of you are already shaking your head. You know what happened. So he said, sure. So I gave him the big bill, and he promptly pocketed it and turned. And that was his that was his business deal. And so that's when my anger flared. And I couldn't believe my reaction. It was just so immediate. I grabbed his arm. And as a nun, this is quite extraordinary. We're not supposed to do that type of thing. But I couldn't help it. because in me there was this self-righteousness of, hey, what are you doing? Again, you're not doing what you said. I actually grabbed his arm to try to yank back the bill. This is just not very positive on my part. But just to say that, anger, when it comes up, it's very sudden. And it needs all the support that we can give it through our practice, not in the moment, but also, not just in the moment, like we've been talking about, but also before that, when it's accumulating. So when I had pause to come back to that situation, if you want to know what the end story was, he kept the bill. There's no way that it was able to be returned. But beyond that, the right and wrong of that, when I had the space to come back and look, I could see that there's a value that I held about people doing what they said and having some sort of integrity with what you said and having a kindness towards a basic decency, a kindness. But looking more deeply, I saw that these are all my view, my assumptions about how people should be, how I would act in that situation, and why, upon deeper reflection, would I expect that from someone else? I don't really know his situation. I don't know what's pushing and pulling him to put emphasis on that dollar, the dollar amount, in a way that the woman could not offer. So, kind of slipping back into the ultimate dimension again. This is where it's hard, but we have to challenge ourselves sometimes. We have to look and see that our perceptions and our views are only our perceptions, our views. There's no right or wrong, right? One of my sisters would often say when I got caught up in situations like this, who said life is fair? And this is coming from another nun. And at first you think, that's really disheartening, right? But when we look more deeply, it's true. There's no law that says this person should be this way or that. It's all due to causes and conditions that pull us to do certain things, to react strongly, to yield. So further reflection from a place of calm is very important for us to do the work of anger transformation, and also daily practice before our anger accumulates is also very important for us to do the work of anger transformation. So we speak of anger as a reaction, kind of a lashing out, and there's a better alternative. And instead of reacting, we act in a way that's restorative. So instead of reaction, it's restorative action. And for me, my practice with anger is that I try to mend the fences inside of myself, first of all. We have a practice of metta meditation, which is sending loving kindness thoughts to the other person. Easy to do when we already love the person, much harder to do when they are a thorn in our side. So that's why we take it up as a conscientious practice. That person that I'm angry with, I send them loving kindness. I wish them well. I reflect on their daily endeavors and wish them success in their endeavors. And this helps me to fight against that dualistic mind of my well-being is at the cost of your well-being. Your well-being is at the cost of my well-being. It helps me to mend that cut. So we have in our, as part of the 4 immeasurable minds, sympathetic joy, which is the capacity to see other people's joy as your own. And when I'm angry, that's probably one of the things that gets injured the most. It's very hard for me to be sympathetically joyful for another person's joy. And that's exactly the pressure point that I focus on in the aftermath of an angry episode, of a wounded episode. So I think of that person, I bring their endeavors, their what they to me value, and I wish them success in that area. When I see that they are doing well in something, I celebrate their success in the language in my mind. And it's kind of like a leading of the mind. It doesn't come naturally, honestly, but this is my way of bringing myself back to the middle way. There are things that we can affirm about the other person or the other side without harming our sense of purpose. We can affirm their qualities. We can affirm their best intentions, even though they may not be realized. And we can affirm what we hold in common with the other person, with the other side. We do this inside of ourselves because when we engage physically, actually with the person, we want that to be awake and alive in us, that feeling of connection. Despite that rift, that surge of anger, there are other things that hold us together. Again, hard to do, but necessary to do, especially if we live as a community, as a family. In a social realm, this is very necessary for us to gather strength together, not to fight one another, but to gather our strength together. So these are restorative actions that after we've calmed, we've looked at the present moment, we've looked at the causes and conditions, then we can begin this restorative action to heal and to move forward. Okay, so I'd like to ask you again to turn to your partners, maybe another person the other side, and to go a little bit more deeply in 2 minutes, a little bit more deeply. In the past, when you touched anger, how did it manifest? Now we're looking at that sensitivity. Did it manifest, were you the belligerent person? Were you more the victim? Were you more the passive-aggressive person? Or again, your loved one, but I hope we're past that now. Okay. Were you the belligerent? Were you the victim? Or did your anger show in a passive-aggressive way? Let's go a little bit more deeply. And we'll hear a sound of the bell to invite us to switch after 2 minutes. Thank you. How many of us at times have acted in a belligerent way? Good. I'm very happy that we can acknowledge. How many of us have, from that place of challenge, acted as a victim? Okay. Thank you for acknowledging. How many of us, this might be harder, are passive aggressive? Oh, okay, good. Passive aggression is a form of anger. It's a way of expressing anger. Okay, my dear community. So, in times of yore, the Zen master would directly challenge our ego, wake us up, and then from that awakening, we have a way forward. But in these present days, we don't often meet a Zen master in our daily life, and we ourselves have to be that Zen master. We need to look to see what those Zen battles are in our daily life. So in our day-to-day of our emotions, the ebb and flow, the surges, the spikes, and the dips, these are our unspoken Zen battles. With the eyes of a practitioner, we see when we touch an emotion, for example, anger in its various manifestations is asking us to engage in a Zen battle. Will we turn in and take care, or will we vent? And if we vent, why? That is the fruit of our looking. So it's a win-win situation when we can take care of that anger. We come back to the breath, come back to a place of interconnectedness with the other person who is, or the other side that is we perceive to be harming us. That's a win. And when we surge in anger, and we have the presence of mind to reflect, to go through this process of calming, and then reflecting what was touched in me, what part of my ego was injured, we have learned something about ourselves. And from that learning, we will be more skillful next time. We will be more careful next time in engaging. Right? So we become more professional in our practice. It's like an athlete who knows ahead of time the race is going to ask of the body something, so need to stretch, need to warm up, need to limber up, loosen up. And as practitioners, as we understand more about the landscape of our mind, our sensitivities, we know when to engage, when to avoid, how much do we engage in something that challenges us. Okay? So we are our own Zen master in this day and age. We look to these daily interactions with our loved ones to learn more deeply about ourselves, and that is one of the beauties of our negative afflictions. That is a fruit of deep looking into our anger, into our fear, into our despair. So no need to be judgmental about our seeds, whether they're strong or manifested. We just need to work with it in order to learn more deeply about ourselves. In the discourse on the better way to catch a snake, there's a very stark example of the Buddha's selflessness in relationship to those things that normally would injure our ego. And I'd like just to read from that. So this is from the Discourse on Knowing a Better Way to Catch a Snake. If the Tathagata is blamed, criticized, defamed, or beaten, he does not care. He does not become angry, walk away in hatred, or do anything in revenge. If someone blames, criticizes, defames, or beats the Tathagata, how does he react? The Tathagata thinks, if someone respects, honors, or makes offerings to a Tathagata, the Tathagata would not, on that account, feel pleased. He would only think that someone is doing this because the Tathagata has attained the fruits of awakening and transformation. So we see in this is a discourse given by the Buddha, that the right direction is in our relationship with a sense of self, or absence of a sense of self, of pride. And it's also hidden in that, in this that I just read, is an admonishment to, again, look into ourselves. When people react a certain way to us, it is also a bell of mindfulness, again, to look at ourselves. Do we have certain skillfulnesses, unskillfulnesses, certain qualities that may water those seeds of anger in that person, or not? And it's a call for us to look in order to transform what needs to be transformed within. And this gives us a North Star of a very clear mind, a clear mind that is not hampered by ego. So even if the Tathagata is threatened physically, even if he is maligned with malicious intent, his reaction is still clear-minded. And our teacher also has that clear-mindedness. In the time of war, Te was very clear not to take sides, but only to focus on the suffering caused by war, and to try his best to speak out about the suffering so that it could wake people up. He spoke, at times he touched anger, at times he touched despair, but in his heart was a place of understanding and compassion for the global community's lack of understanding and compassion, lack of understanding and compassion for the war-torn. So his actions were very clear. He knew what he had to do, and he put his full attention to that, to speak up about the war, to bring awareness, to give rise to awareness in a larger global community. This is a very different approach than a place of protest, of righteous indignation. And I'm very mindful that we, here in Mississippi, the presence of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy is very present with us. Martin Luther King Jr. also had this larger view, this clarity. His vision of beloved community has no place for righteous anger, because the beloved community is a community that encompasses everyone, is inclusive of everyone. And as we have seen in our exploration of anger, these strong afflictive emotions, anger is something that divides us, that sets up a wall between our sense of self, our self-entitlement, and that of others. And in a beloved community, there's no place for that wall. So our path before us is to come back to that grounding of deepening understanding, deepening compassion, so that we can then recognize what we have in common with one another. And we know that now, as a global community, it's more important than ever that we give rise to this collective awareness of responsibility for one another. We can survive individually, but very short term. We can put down, cut down, but it is a very short-term solution. And in the long run, as a global community, as a planetary, ecologically as well, it's not sustainable. So the path of transformation is the path of peace. And this path is a very necessary path that we are walking. And I'd like to end by thanking each and every one of you wholeheartedly for engaging in this peace work. Taking care of our anger is taking care of our peace. Taking care of our peace is taking care of each other. Taking care of each other is taking care of our planet. This is a very noble path that we're on. Thank you.